just another brick in the wall.
Welcome to the Beau Show. Thanks for watching. One of the most iconic songs by the group Pink Floyd is called Another Brick in the Wall, which is divided into 3 parts. The most well-known part is part 2, which includes the famous lines, "We don't need no education." It goes like this. We don't need no education. It kind of became one of those songs that had a protest feel to it, or at least a protest against conformity and mind control. So Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook and Instagram, yes, he is in charge of both, sent a formal letter to Roger Waters, one of the leading members of Pink Floyd, asking for permission to use this song for an Instagram ad. Rolling Stone reported that Waters said the offer would be a huge amount of money. And as artist, and more specifically as the rights owner of the piece of music, that owner can dictate where the song is played and how it is used. This is true every time you turn on your TV or your smartphone, smart device, and you hear a piece of music for a commercial. And it's usually for a very lucrative amount of money for that song's owner. You probably also recall when certain groups threw a complete hissy fit when Donald Trump used their music for some of his rallies against their desires. Acts like Neil Young and Axl Rose, Maroon 5, and Pharrell. But due to the venues where Trump was holding the rallies, they had an existing arrangement with the venue. So legally, they couldn't really stop it. However, a social media or TV ad is a much different beast. It requires a mechanical and master license, which in this case comes right from Roger Waters. So what was Waters' response to this? Well, I think it's better to hear it in his words and dialect.
It's a missive from Mark Zuckerberg to me, right? Arrived this morning with an offer of a huge amount of money, and the answer is F you. No fucking way. And I only mention that because this is an insidious, it's the insidious movement of them to take over absolutely everything, you know. So those of us who do have any power, and I do have a little bit, in terms of the control of the publishing of my songs, I do anyway. So I will not be a party to this bullshit, Zuckerberg. We want to thank you for considering this project. We feel that the core sentiment of this song is still so prevalent and necessary today, which speaks to how timeless a work is true. And yet they want to subjoin it. They want to use it to make Facebook and Instagram even bigger and more powerful than it already is, so that it can continue to censor all of us in this room and prevent this story about Julian Assange getting out to the general public, so the general public could go, what? What? No, no more, nada más.
I had to watch this several times just to make sure I was hearing him correctly, because this was one of the biggest rebukes of Zuckerberg I have ever heard, especially from a celebrity or a musician. Most musicians would jump at the chance to have their song featured as part of an Instagram ad campaign. The exposure is golden, and the money is huge. They'd sell out in a heartbeat. But Waters doesn't need the money. He is saying no on a principled level, that Zuckerberg would be gaining more control, which is exactly the point the song is making, that we don't need more thought control. Waters made this statement at a pro-Julian Assange event last week, put on by the People's Forum, in an effort to protect journalists and a free press. They're trying to save Julian's life, so his father and brother are out on a speaking tour. There are so many things about this event and Waters' comment that are relevant to our current society, all wrapped up into one, such as the protection of independent journalism. And especially, I think, as we consider the suppression of journalism like the Epoch Times in Hong Kong and the destruction of their printing press there. And it's not just about the protection of the press, but the independence of the press, the freedom from propaganda. But Waters' comments about Zuckerberg come at such a precarious time in the discussion about big tech's hegemony, especially after the suspension of Donald Trump's social media by basically everyone in big tech. And even the recent About Face that Facebook did is they removed their ban on posts about the origin of the coronavirus in light of recent news. The question is, why was Facebook removing posts to begin with? What was the source of information they used? I think it was likely the World Health Organization. They kept using that as the source, which is controlled by China. But Facebook kept relying on the WHO for its information, which was already compromised. And in the process, it removed or banned anyone questioning the origin. I remember when I watched the documentary Plandemic and how it got taken down by YouTube and Facebook almost immediately. Yet so many of the claims that were made in this movie have proven true, including the origins of this virus. Now that we know that Zuckerberg and Anthony Fauci were in direct contact, with Zuckerberg offering his platform to inform, or rather misinform, Representative Jim Jordan has sent a letter to Zuck, raising the prospect that the government, under Fauci, could have been suppressing the First Amendment. Parts of the recent FOIA releases show redacted exchanges between the two. Jordan wants to know what's in those redactions. But let's now dive into the song, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and its lyrics, and discuss what the song is about and why it has such relevance on this topic. I'm pulling a lot of this analysis from a website called The Wall Analysis, and you can check it out. It's a pretty deep dive. But I want to relate that analysis to our current society. So the song starts out, as I mentioned earlier, in saying, we don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. For Waters and David Gilmour, the songwriters, this was a song of angst against the teachers of their youth. Some have seen this as unrest against certain kinds of education, while others see it more akin to anarchy, as a protest against all forms of education, which is actually why South Africa banned the song and album. That was really a harbinger of what is happening here in the United States. But Waters was quite specific with his lyrics, directing this at the teachers of his youth who used thought control to mold children into little drones and clones of society. Waters, an artist, was rallying against the type of education that creates kids with no artistic individuality or expression, no independent thought. Think of how that relates today. Social media has bred a generation of idiots, of mindless clones who regurgitate the same information that has been programmed for them. They give you the information specifically so it can be repeated without questioning it or its source. The origin of this pandemic is Exhibit A. Facebook removed posts that questioned the lab leak theory. So the opening lines are not so much about revolution necessarily as they are reclaiming one's individuality. The musicality of the rhythm guitar and the somber minor key echo the drone of conformity. In the music video for this song, it shows a teacher putting the kids in a meat grinder, which is the school, and they all come out like perfectly uniform, faceless worms of society, devoid of any individuality. So Waters sings, "Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone." And then, all in all, you're just another brick in the wall. This signifies to me that when we let our teachers or other authorities beat us into submission through thought control, we become just another brick in the wall, devoid of any individuality or expression, and also immobile in this massive wall, never questioning how or why we got in the wall in the first place. The second verse features the choir of children, singing the same lyrics that Waters sings in the first verse. They are all huddled in a perfect little circle with this eerie, red, spooky lighting, likely symbolic of what society has wanted of them. In the video as well, there are many images of hammers, which might be a reference to how ideas get hammered into our heads, or maybe even how hammers can be both useful and destructive, depending on how we use them. They march forward in unison, like you might see in China or North Korea, and that signature red color. Ironically, it is David Gilmour's signature guitar solo over all of this, which is the most individualistic, artistic thing about the song, which may be the one shining light. That individual artistry is still possible as the red hammers kick in unison like China's Red Army. In the movie The Wall, this version is perhaps even more graphic and sinister. And you could take a look at it here. The kids come out on conveyor belts, which is even just more jarring, and even have these deformed masks on to obscure their identity. Does that look familiar to you? We've been masking ourselves for over a year now. Then the kids actually walk out on the conveyor belt willingly into the grinder, which is a much more graphic depiction of how these cloned kids will walk to their own death. But finally, at least in the movie version, the kids begin a massive revolt. It becomes total bedlam and chaos as they begin destroying the school. To be honest, it kind of looked like Portland and Minneapolis and Seattle last year as they went up in flames. And then the movie shows that this was all just kind of a fantasy in a young boy's head. With all the references to the hammer in both the music video and the film, I find that eerily similar to the hammer in the Soviet flag for communists, as well as that deep, deep red color in the music video. Just seems a little bit strange that there's that similarity. Much has been written about this song, the video, and the movie because there is so much symbolism. I'm providing a new take on this in light of what Roger Waters said about Zuckerberg, for whom he has much disdain. And also take it a step further when it comes to our education system. Think about the places where communism and critical race theory are taught nowadays. The idea that America is a bad place, a place of systemic racism, a place where the Caucasian is the worst race on earth and only an oppressor. Thankfully, governors like Ron DeSantis have recognized this and banned it from their schools' curricula. That's important because it's not allowing our children to become another brick in the wall. Other states like Idaho, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Iowa have also introduced such legislation. On the more specific scale that Waters was speaking, or singing rather, especially with respect to Julian Assange, it is clear that he doesn't like Facebook and Instagram's power and wants no part of aiding in its growth. Big tech companies have begun to get in the business of choosing sides and virtue signaling. You can now add your pronouns to your Instagram page. I don't know if you've actually seen this feature yet, but you can. But you can only pick a set of already predefined pronouns, which is ironic because the LGBTQIA+ community has expanded its flag and its letters. I would think any word you want could be chosen, but you can't. It still exists within certain parameters. I don't know what kind of ad Zuckerberg wanted to create with this song, but it is ironic considering that the very subject matter Waters was writing about, which is creating a society of malleable clones, would be something Zuckerberg wants. I mean, Waters can't spell it out any more clearly. We don't need no thought control. Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. By removing certain comments, content, and groups, and whatever Facebook considers to be misinformation, it is defining what content gets to you, and by default, what you are permitted to say. That's thought control. From the Defend Assange Twitter page, Assange mentions how Mark Zuckerberg once called his Facebook users dumb, F-U-C-K-S, for giving over their private data in 2003, when Facebook's beta version was first released. The data from over 50 million Facebook users was used, analyzed, collected, and abused by Cambridge Analytica. That data mining was a huge scandal. And here we are, decades later, and Zuckerberg is more powerful than ever. We are the bricks in his wall because he controls the education, if you will. More and more people have relied on social media as their primary source of information. And the sad part of this is we have willingly walked into this, just like the kids in the meat grinder, and accepted it. People blame Fox News and CNN and MSNBC for being biased. But if we only rely on social media to educate ourselves, we are permitting ourselves to become another brick in the wall. You can't even mention the word COVID or vaccine without the big tech companies slapping some sort of flag over it, directing you to another website. Or maybe even a scrim that makes a claim about the veracity of the content you posted, especially with something like the pandemic. You probably recall how much they relied on health experts, when only months later, those same health experts don't look like experts anymore. Anthony Fauci might be the biggest fraud of them all. And the level of coordination between Fauci and Zuckerberg, done under the guise of having some sort of, central information hub, while also suppressing any questions or alternate theories, would clearly be an abridgment of speech, or should I say, an abridgment of thought. When Waters and Gilmour wrote this song in the 70s, it was a middle finger to those teachers who suppressed their individuality and free thought. Isn't it a shame that the same thing is happening now, just now on a more worldwide scale? They think that Donald Trump is the problem, not the Wuhan lab. Conspiracy theories are only theories until they are proven true. I don't know if you caught Jon Stewart's bravery on Stephen Colbert's show recently, but even Stewart believes that science, or, rather the tinkering of science, created this pandemic. So when I see someone brave and even leftist like Stewart say this, probably much to the chagrin of the Fauci and Biden-loving pal Colbert, or Roger Waters, who is defending Julian Assange and free expression, we have to recognize these outliers. I was never really a big Pink Floyd fan in my youth, but the more research I did into this song and its videos, as well as the recent comments by Waters, the more I realized that art can imitate life. But we have to be willing to recognize it and learn from it. Do we want to be churned up in the educational mill? Do we want our kids to be indoctrinated in our colleges that we pay astronomical amounts of tuition for? Do we want for Facebook, Instagram, Google, and Twitter to determine what's best for us and decide what is true and false? Do we want them deciding elections and suppressing candidates? All in all, do we want to become just another brick in the wall?
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.